Good morning to some people, good afternoon to others. Welcome to, I believe this is our third peer-to-peer call. I know more and more people are coming on the line. I really want to thank everybody for taking some time out of your day to participate in this conversation about hiring staff and retaining staff, which is so key to the success of your of all of our work and your regional partnership grant. We know how much and you guys get out of speaking to one another. I know it's most valuable in person, but I really appreciate everybody coming on the line to help take part in this conversation and the conversations that we have been having sort of in between our opportunities to meet in person. I think it's a great way for all of you to be able to share information with one another. So thank you so much for your participation. I know we have two sites that have been identified who are going to be sharing some really helpful information with you, and please feel free, and I strongly encourage asking questions, sharing thoughts and ideas with one another, because this is really meant to be a conversation. You know, if you're too shy to, if you don't want to sort of say something over the phone, there is the chat box too. So I'm really encouraged everyone participating in the conversation. Thank you much for your time. Thank you so much to the National Center for helping to organize this, and for our two sites and presenters today for sharing the work that they've done. So Claudia or Jane, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Jane Pfeiffer, and I'm the program director for the program technical assistance for the RPG grant program with the National Center on Substance Abuse and Child Welfare. As Jean mentioned, this is the third of these programmatic, what we're now calling learning exchange calls that are peer-to-peer calls. That we mean to be quite informal, frankly, to allow everyone to have a dialogue, to have a conversation. So while we have a few more slides, if you joined us for the last call, we had a couple of slides here in this one. In our time together today, we have a few more slides, but we really want to emphasize the fact that we want this to be a conversation. And while our two featured grantees are going to present some information and answer some questions, we want to hear from all of you. So please, as everyone said, post a question in the chat box, or stop and ask a question, or indicate in the chat box, and we will get your question answered. So I want to frame this just very briefly before I turn it over to our first presenter. When we talk about the issue of hiring and retaining qualified staff, there are a number of issues that stand out, and we certainly saw those in the questions that came through as many of you registered. There's the question of staff turnover. It's not a question of if staff turnover is going to happen. It's really a question of when. And then there are many factors, of course, related to that. But that's an ongoing issue. And as many of you know and have already experienced, that you get your policy and procedures and your practices down, you get everybody trained, you get everything going well. Things seem to be moving like a well-oiled machine. And then you have sometimes significant staff turnover, and you have to, if not start over, you have to backtrack in some ways. And that also has an effect on the collaboration that's happening, because relationships and trust are built during these times, and so staff turnover alone can be an issue. You're going to hear from our featured speakers a bit about that, and we want to hear from you too, all of you on the call, about how you've managed that inevitable, if you will, that inevitable staff turnover. We're also, while we talk about hiring and retaining qualified staff, which is critical, we use the word qualified because a lot of times, and again, I know many of you have experienced this, you post a open position, and the applicants you get are not quite what you need, don't really have the qualifications. And so now you're faced with options, many of which are maybe none of which are completely ideal at that point. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But beyond the issue of qualified staff, there's also the issue of finding the right fit for your program. And that may certainly be about minimum qualifications, but it can also be someone who understands family-centered practice, who is able to step in and be part of your RPG team. So there are many issues, and you're going to hear, as I said, from our featured speakers, the couple of grantees that you're going to hear from, the Illinois Collaborative and Iowa Seasons, and through their information that they're sharing, again, we want there really to be an opportunity for folks to have some dialogue. So we'll stop periodically and ask questions, and then there'll be some time at the end where, depending on what all we've covered, there are some additional questions that we'll try to share. And we want to continue this conversation at the grantee meeting, and in other ways we want to continue this peer-to-peer opportunity to talk about these both challenges but also strategies. We want to focus on strategies to address some of this. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our next speaker, who is from the Illinois Collaborative, the Youth Network Council, Illinois Collaborative on Youth. And I'm going to ask Amanda McMillan to tell us about the challenges and strategies that they're employing there as it relates to hiring and retaining qualified staff. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak today and share about our experience. I feel like it's helpful because we're all similar, but there is some unique differences in how we're organized, and so I feel like the best way that I can address this component of how we have addressed hiring and being able to retain staff within our collaborative is to share a little bit about how our program is structured. And so we call our project the Illinois Intact Family Recovery Program, IFR for short. And within this project, we have targeted 4 counties within the Illinois that are outside of our Cook County, which is where Chicago is. So these counties specifically are address rural, suburban, and urban areas outside of Chicago. And the space between the two, oh, thank you. The space between, if you can go to the next slide, that'd be really great. This here shows a little bit about how our project is structured. So within our ICOY, Illinois Collaboration on Youth, we are the lead agency, and we're unique in regards to the fact that we do not provide any direct services. We are really the convener, the fiscal agent, and the project lead for this project. DCFS is our state child welfare organization, and their role is to really just to provide referrals to our child welfare agencies, which are private organizations in our state. So in one region, we have 2 adjacent counties, Winnebago and Boone counties, and the way that we've structured it is that we have one child welfare organization, private agency, Children's Home and Aid, that is our treatment or intervention site. And then they partner with 2 different substance use providers in the area. And each of the substance use providers hire a recovery coordinator, and that recovery coordinator then is located at the child welfare agency and works collaboratively with the child welfare providers to focus on getting each of the families that come in that are with an identified substance use into treatment, follows them through treatment, and post-treatment stabilization. And then our control site is a separate child welfare agency in the same region, and they just do the regular child welfare services as usual. And so we're comparing across sites. And then in our second region, which is about 100 miles difference from the first region and the second region, we have a similar structure with our child welfare agency and substance use providers. And then we have an evaluation partner that works with all the control sites and intervention sites. Can you go to the next slide, please? Slide. Thank you. So another key component of when we were in the planning phase of this project is how are we going to communicate and what decisions need to be made where in each space, and how do we ensure that there's support in every single area, from frontline staff to supervisors to even executives. So we developed a structure so that the committee meeting or steering committee is at the executive level. And so these are representatives from every single partner, from the evaluation to every single child welfare and substance use provider that comes together. Initially, when we were planning, we met every single month, and we walked through exactly how this project, how we're going to work together and the logistics. And now now that we're running and functioning, we just meet once a quarter. The regional meetings are the supervisors of each of the partner agencies that are implementing the site, and we meet every single month and make sure that we intentionally talk about what's going well, what are any barriers, what are the things that you need, and so myself and the evaluations there, and we really strategize around keeping the relationships between the partners strong. And then at the frontline level, every single week we require that the recovery coordinators and the child welfare staff are getting individual supervision as well as weekly case supervision, so that there's constant communication and organized ways for them to feel supported. Can you go to the next slide, please? So some of our strategies for hiring, because we're working with like 9 different organizations that are all really different. Substance use, when we first started a year and a half ago, substance use agencies didn't know really what it meant to be a child welfare agency, and child welfare agencies didn't really know what it meant to be a substance use agency. There's a lot of cultural difference. And so we had to talk as a collective group, and we came up with some uniform procedures. So we have developed a uniform job description where everybody was under the same understanding of what is a recovery coordinator and what are their expectations across child welfare and substance use agencies, where their qualifications, that kind of thing. We also developed a supportive recruitment and hiring process. So it was the responsibility of everyone in the region, when we had a vacancy of a recovery coordinator, then both the child welfare agency and the substance use agency would put their feelers out into the field. And then when it came to final candidates, we expected, even though they were a substance use agency employee, we asked that the child welfare agency had an opportunity to interview the final candidates to make sure they would be a good fit with their team, because they'd be working with them so closely. Can you go to the next slide, please? So some of our strategies for retention, and now we're going to go into more of this, though, is that it was really important to understand the clarity of roles and responsibility, especially amongst supervisors at the substance use agency, who is responsible for their employee, but also at the child welfare agency that would work with them on a day-to-day, and they were interacting with their staff. And so, and also with the child welfare staff and the recovery coordinator, this is a brand new position and role for them, and so it was really important to clarify what is everybody's role and responsibility here to move this program forward. We had to develop a structure of supervision across the board that was expected, and then also myself as a program manager, I would monitor and do program walkthroughs with all the frontline staff to make sure that they were implementing the program as we designed it. And then also some other structures that we put in place to make sure that all these providers and all these staff were on the same page. As we created some key things like a program flowchart, which identified from beginning to end whose role was what and what was the where the client was in each of the phases of the program, and who was supposed to do what and what were they supposed to do together, and that really helped. And then we do also have incorporated ongoing training and learning collaboratives based off of feedback we get from those regional meetings. Can you go to the next slide, please? All right, and that's just the structure and overview of some key things we've done, and I know we'll go into more, but I just wanted to provide that context. Thank you.
So, Amanda, this is Jane, and I'd like to ask you a couple of questions and then open it up for others to ask some questions as well. So, can you talk a bit about what happens when, and I alluded to this, I think, at the beginning, but what kind of strategies do you put in place when the pool of qualified candidates is small or smaller than you'd hoped?
Yeah, and we find this as a big challenge in our communities that we're serving, especially in the rural and suburban areas. What we have actually found is that the majority of our recovery coordinators are staff that have moved from a different role into this position. And one of the things that it was kind of a sell, because we found that the culture of working with substance use organizations is that they're really used to people coming to them, and that if the participant or client doesn't come to them, then that's it. That's the end of the role. They're working very 9 to 5. And so this role required that not only would the person not work at the substance use agency, they'd work in the child welfare agency, but they'd be required to do home visits, that they would be part of a collective team, and that their job was to hunt down the client. And so that would require them to work some evenings and have a lot more flexibility in their schedule. So it's kind of a hard sell. But one of the things that we did is we partnered the substance use agency with the child welfare agency to really help them understand and break down some of those misconceptions of what a home visit was like and help create that comfort level there. Also, we made sure that the substance use organizations knew what was expected, allowing them to have flex time. So if they worked until 6 or 7 o'clock at night, they didn't have to come in 9 o'clock every single morning. So those are some of the things we had to work through to make sure that they were okay with that. With child welfare, we found that transparency was really, really important in the interview process for people to know exactly what this role entailed, and generally try to find people that had a little bit more life experience so that they weren't as challenged with lack of knowledge of what what trauma really looks like and working with families and substance use issues. So those are some of the strategies that our team kind of looks for when possible. But, if there was a silver bullet here, then, we would all use it. But those are some of the strategies we do to try to use the small pool that we have and encourage them into this new role.
So to recap a little bit, it sounds like clarity, transparency, making sure that individuals who are candidates are really clear on what the job expectations are. And you didn't say it exactly, but it sounds like having some dialogue about perhaps during the interview process or what have you is key to making sure. So that to me is both a hiring strategy when you have a limited pool, but then also it's a retention issue, because the last thing you want to do is hire someone who for whatever reason, had a misunderstanding about what they sort of were getting into or what the job entails.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing, too, is just really engaging the child welfare agency as well in this process, because it affects everyone. This is not just the substance use agency's issue. We are a team, and so we all are connected in this community. I think that's one of the unique things about suburban and rural communities. Everybody knows everybody. And so they might know someone that might be a good fit and can put in a good word. So that just helps kind of that word of mouth referral, which is usually the most effective.
Thanks. Let me open it up to everyone on the line. Are there are there either questions that you have for our Illinois grantee or specific strategies that you put into place when you have a particularly small group of candidates? Please feel free to take yourself off mute and answer the question if you'd like. Okay, well, we'll go ahead and keep moving, and if folks have something they'd like to add, either a question or a comment about their experience, please just absolutely let us know, and we'll go ahead and keep moving. Before I turn it over to our Iowa featured grantee, a couple of other questions, Amanda. So what I'd like to do is know from you, Amanda, about if there are particular strategies when you're in the process of sort of investing in staff who apply, as opposed to having a vacant position waiting for the perfect candidate, so to speak. Are there staff development sort of opportunities that both probably help with retaining staff, but also allow you to create qualified staff? Have you had that experience?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One of the areas that, especially since it's a newer position, it's not something that is, there are not many people in our state that are doing the recovery coordinator position, is that we have very intentionally had different meetings and trainings that connect recovery coordinators as a whole through both the regions to be able to talk about what their experience is and to be able to share with how they have been able to address those challenges. So we do that in in-person meetings, and then we've also done these over the phone, what we call, similar to this, like a learning collaborative where it's open to all child welfare supervisors and recovery coordinators, where they kind of talk through different cases and challenges and questions around like, hey, I don't know what to do in this situation, or I addressed this, and so what have other people done? And I think that having those opportunities, and this is coming from, this is a suggestion by people in the field saying this would be really helpful. So by opening that, then it helps create this ongoing community and learning environment, and we all recognize that this is something new for us and we're kind of growing together, and it's helping us turn into from this kind of like forming group to more of a performing area. And then so with new people that come in, then they just kind of jump right in and they can hear in advance from other people about, oh, they experienced this, and so they can relate it to when they go out. Now they might have a context to go like how to handle that situation. And it's also a way for myself then to listen about what other resources might they need to help them do their jobs easier, what are things that we can bring to them. So that has been really, really helpful that we just started implementing, and we've had good feedback about.
And Amanda, how often does that community of learning, how often does that happen?
Every month.
Oh, monthly. Okay. Okay, great. Thanks. I'm going to pause here again. Do folks have questions, comments, thoughts, or examples from their own practice? Okay. Then I'm going to turn it over to our two representatives from Northwest Iowa Mental Health Center, affectionately known as Iowa Seasons or Seasons Center, Jean Dre, who's the program project director, and Sandy Peltzer. So Jean, I think you're going to speak first, so I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Jane. And we want to thank everybody for giving us the opportunity to share. We've in no way perfected this recruiting, training, and hiring, but we have lots of lessons learned from it since we've been doing it for a while. So I'll just jump in with my slides if you want to go ahead and move forward. I don't know who's turning the slides. Okay. Yeah, as I said, I'm the project director for our RPG4 grant. Christina Egging-Postma wasn't able to be with us today, and she's with our RPG5 grant. Sandy Pelser will also jump in as we go through some questions and different things. Sandy is a clinical therapist, and what we're going to talk about, focus a lot with our part of the presentation, is how we've really expanded how we are using supervision of our care coordinators and case coordinators to really promote hiring, training, and retaining our staff. So if you can go to the next slide. Okay, just a brief overview. As Jane said, we're from Iowa. Our formal name is Northwest Iowa Mental Health Center, so we're a behavioral health center. With RPG4, you'll see we serve 10 counties in Northwest Iowa. They're part of our southern region. And RPG5, we're actually serving 11 counties, and we have 2 counties that overlap between the two. So we have a total of 19 counties in Northwest Iowa. We have 2 project partners, the Department of Human Services, the Western Region, which is our child welfare agency, and Juvenile Court Services, which is the 3rd Judicial District. And we're in the process of just expanding our partnership right now, and we contract with 2 evaluators, Dr. Michelle Devlin and Dr. Mark Gray. I'll let you move to the next slide. Okay, Amanda talked a lot about their communication structure, and so I wanted to kind of model that for you, how we're also using communication. And then really today I want to focus on how we're looking at providing quality supervision in our rural area and how we're using that to influence hiring, training, and retaining quality staff. We too have a regional partnership board. It's agency leaders. They meet quarterly. They're looking at long-term sustainability and practice change. We have an implementation team that is predominantly project staff who meet weekly, and we're monitoring the goals, the activities, and then making modifications, changes as necessary based on implementation. And then our third column you see there is we've really focused on a multi-tiered approach for supervision, individual supervision, clinical care and service engagement teams, and location meetings to really provide support to staff and working with those in the field. Those activities occur weekly, and that's where we really work on recruiting, enrolling, and engaging clients. They staff cases. They look at client outcomes. They do a lot of peer learning, team building, and also we found it's important that our staff talk about and work on their own self-care. You can go to the next slide. And I'm going through these rather fast because I know that Jane and the team want this to be a conversation. So strategies for hiring. We have had our supervisors become more involved in helping design interview questions and address unique positions and the characteristics. As I said, we're very rural. What we found when we're interviewing and hiring people, we try and really go into definitions of what does rural mean. Some of our offices are 2 hours apart. There only may be 1 or 2 people in an office. So there may be really minimal support services in a given county or a community. We talk a lot about educating them, and as Amanda talked, being transparent on the challenges with new program startup. Some of our grants we've had not only started RPG, but it's been in a new office location. As you all know, that creates additional challenges. And then also the level of comfort people have in working alone in a small rural office or an office with few employees. We know that a lot of our especially young people work also provides some social socialization and opportunities in that, and they can feel pretty isolated in a small community. Supervisors provide support for enhancing onboarding and orientation processes. We're trying to do a lot more work mutually with our HR department, similar to what Amanda said. We're doing a lot more creating of workflow processes. So if someone leaves or starts new, we're giving a consistent message. We're making sure things are hard copy as well as electronic. As reference guides, we're trying to do more job shadowing, and as I said, we've enhanced supervision so it's done individually, it's done as a team, and it's done by location where the project staff are at. The third thing with hiring is supervisor and other staff provide support by becoming familiar with local communities and resources, really helping our staff working in those offices to understand what resources are there. And we also provide support for marketing and event coordinator, a staff person we have, so they're not alone out there. We had a lot of our staff say, you know, I'm hired as a care coordinator. I have a social work background. I'm not a marketing person. So trying to really support them from hiring and to onboarding them. You can go on to the next slide then. Strategies for training staff. We've identified two there. Supervisors ensure staff have resources and tools to perform their job responsibilities. As I said, the clients we know are all working with really complex cases, so we make sure we're giving them evidence-based programs. Part of those are, you know, we identified in our specific grants, but also just other programs, maybe along with motivational interviewing or just how you complete assessment forms and that, as well as training and support with topics such as trauma-informed care, cultural competency, adverse childhood experiences, just the brain research we know that's out there. We also found that we provide CEUs when possible. That's a way of also, that supports too with helping recruit and retain staff to some of their current licensures and that require them to have CEUs. So if we can provide that along with the training, and then designing and building training plans with their input. We look at what RPG services need as a whole. We look at the agency, and the supervisors work with individual staff to see professionally how we can support them. And then key project staff and evaluators host specialized training. We just started this last week. We offered an RPG implementation meeting between the two RPG sites, and it really went well. One of our evaluators did an excellent job of talking with the staff about all the opportunities around data collection and gathering and how professionally that promotes their skills as clinicians. I mean, they just really turned it from this kind of burden to this real opportunity, and we got a lot of positive feedback from our staff on that and really appreciated meeting individually with the evaluators in that. And then we also want to address current and emerging needs as identified by the staff. So the supervisors in meeting with them individually and teams can come back to us as the project staff and say, here's where we need to fill in some gaps. Here's some more training needed. This is where they need more support at. Then the next slide is strategies for retention. To provide ongoing supervision, as I said, using the multi-level approach. We have a supervisor for the staff who provide therapy, as well as a supervisor. Sandy's on the line here for what we call our care coordinators and case coordinators. That was one thing we found with RPG 5 as we started that, to really provide more supervision for those individuals working on the cases. We do weekly care team meetings that focus on the clinical EDPs and service engagement for how we recruit and retain clients and that. And then we're trying to do more work around having myself and other project staff location meetings in our newer offices, just providing support that way. As I said, they're typically pretty small offices. We're trying to enhance team and peer learning opportunities. We've started to do some things around, we did a personality leadership self-assessment on, I think you probably all are aware, what's your color? Are you more relationship-based? Are you more task-oriented in that? And so they begin to really learn as a team. We identified as a team the skill sets of our staff, and they have conversations about how they're working together. We are combining some of our location meetings, and as I said, we started having our joint quarterly meetings. The third thing, supervisors assess and monitor for unique challenges in working in the rural areas. We spend a lot of time thinking about the isolation, what it's like to work alone. How do you establish professional boundaries in small communities? Just providing that, it's really ongoing support in knowing the hard work they do. Another key one I focus on is there's so many fears of unknown with new program development. We hear things like, well, what about this? What about that? And it's like, well, we'll figure out a process for that. We're moving forward with that. And so for staff who haven't done new program development, there's a lot of fear there of the unknown. And then we work a lot with our HR and supervisors to research traditional and innovative retention strategies. We're looking on some 10-year bonuses, so a bonus if we can keep staff, if they're here 6 months or a year. We're doing some work with Seasons, our own strategic planning team, as they have a goal that's called Invest in Our People. So we're trying to build upon what we're doing as an agency as a whole. And you can go on then to the next slide. I think that's just my contact information, Sandy's contact information, and Christina's contact information. And I don't know, Sandy, if there's something you want to add to that, or we'll just kind of wait for questions. And I feel like I went through that really fast. I apologize, and I read it, but I do better with my notes. So anyway, that's what we have.
Jean, thanks. That was really informative. So I was wondering if you might be willing to talk a little bit about some of the strategies. I asked Amanda earlier about sort of growing your staff or developing potentially staff who may not be quite qualified or for whatever reason, because in your case, because of the ruralness of it and some of the challenges with pay, I think there are challenges there, of course. And so I know that you've had some strategies, put some strategies into place in terms of interns and just some of the ways that you have been creative, frankly, about trying to grow staff, if you will, or bringing them on as interns. Can you talk for a minute about that?
Yeah. In fact, we just hired to help with RPG an intern that we had last year. So she came back to us. Yeah, that's a great thing. We are fortunate. We have 3 private colleges or universities. Well, no, actually we have 5. 3 we've been working in the really rural areas with. So we do reach out to them for interns at both a bachelor's level and a master's level, so that we can give them experience in the field and even promote them, starting them as an intern and then hiring them on. So we've done it at the bachelor's level. I just hired a gal to do some prevention work, and we've had multiple trauma therapists that have come to us as interns and then are staying on as full-time clinicians for us. So that's been really helpful for us. The other thing we're trying to do is we do a lot of work on our staff that we currently have too, on what are the skill sets they have, specific skill sets in terms of that could help with new program startup or help with things as data collection. So really thinking in terms of those skills that you can transfer to other career paths maybe or professions. I talked briefly just about, we just recently did a really simple colors self-assessment. Are you relationship-based? Are you more detailed oriented. So really trying to match people with the right positions, or what that also tells us is, and Sandy can speak to that, when you're doing supervision with someone, it's important to know, are they more relationship based, or how do you even send emails to people? If I've known in my career, if somebody's really relationship based, they probably like smiley faces. If someone is really more factual, I just want the short, quick facts, tell me, they probably don't want a lot of, hey, how are you doing, what's going on, oh, by the way, here's this. So we try and work, with things with that. Also, we try and look at where we place people at, what location might work best. Can we be flexible with that? For our bachelor's level people, we really promote them maybe to go on and get their master's so they can come back as clinicians for us. Those kinds of things. We also internally, for growing, we have a hire on bonus, so we work with our staff to say, if you can find someone and you refer them for a position here and we hire them, you get a bonus for that. So I think that building the bench internally is really it's been positive for us.
Thanks, Jean. Sandy, I know you're having some difficulty unmuting.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Are you there? Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Hey, I was just going to jump in and add on to what Jean was just saying. A couple of thoughts were that I supervise the frontline staff, and I've really focused on relationship-based or reflective supervision, and I'm not sure, that kind of became a buzzword a few years ago in infant mental health, so maybe some of you have had training in reflective supervision, which is really a different style of supervision and really takes a look at how does the work that you're doing professionally, how does that work in terms of your own fundamental value and your own personal life, and bridging that gap, and addressing some of the secondary trauma that goes on, or just a lot of our staff is very young and this is their first job out of college, and so those home visits can be traumatic or shocking for the frontline staff, and so processing that with them and helping them feel like what they're doing is really important and valued. And like Jean said, we use a lot of the personality profile information to help us understand each other too as we're going through the processes.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sandy. So let me stop and allow for some questions. Folks should be unmuted, but you can also use the chat box. Questions specifically for our Iowa featured grantee, or comments, your own experience about some of these issues that they've raised?
Well, hi, this is Katie from Tennessee. Sorry. You can go ahead. Finish it up. Okay. So I actually was an intern. I got my master's in social work at UT in Knoxville, and then I had my internship at Great Start, and then I was promoted to being a therapist, and now I'm program coordinator. So I'm proof that hiring interns is a good thing. But so now that I've gotten promoted and I'm hiring people, I was just wondering if anybody had suggestions about maybe workflows for training new clinicians that are stepping into a program. So I'm just feeling a little bit overwhelmed because there's just so much that goes into that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, anyone?
This is Jean Dre from Seasons, and we have created different workflows. I think it's more related to our own processes, but I know we can share any of those with people. We are creating them more. I think we use a Visio program, and they're more diagram oriented, but we're also starting to put some narrative to that. But I know one of the things we found in the workflows, even just as you list, this is the process and this is what you do, or decision making, we're also including right there, if there's a special form to use, then they're putting where the link to that form is at or where it can be found in our health record system or policy system and that. So it's kind of hitting not just the process, but also what forms are used in that. But we can sure share any of those if you're interested. And we'd be interested in seeing others as well.
Yeah, I think it would just be really neat to see, like, if there's not so much like the content of like what's actually being trained, because I'm sure all of us have a little bit different, except for maybe like trauma-informed things. But maybe just some ideas, because there's just so much that goes into our program. It can just feel like a lot when you have a new person stepping in.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and that's one of the reasons why we're doing the diagram workflows, and then I'm also wanting some, step-by-step narrative ones, because I think people do have different learning styles, and so one person may like to do a diagram, and I've met with people that are like, that's just so overwhelming to me, all these squares and boxes and, arrows, that I just want to read, do step A, do step B, C, so trying to really think through what works for different people. And then the opportunity to have the supervision, sufficient time, and peer time to talk about that, what's working and what's not working.
Right.
This is Amanda, and we also found that developing a specific program flowchart was really, really important and helpful for all new staff as they came onto the program. The other thing that we found was that, because we started implementing programming a year ago, is that we actually did a refresher training for every single person, again, just this month, because just to make sure that everybody was on the same page. And, there were some new staff, and then there were others that, just to kind of make sure, again, that we're all on the same page about what we're doing. So I don't think it has to be like a one-time training and you're done. Like, it's okay to keep talking about it.
That's a really good idea. Yeah, I was thinking about having kind of like a staff in-service. So I was going to train my new staff members on seeking safety, which is the EVP that we use for our outpatient IOP, and maybe throw in some of the colors or some of the other team building. Where I hadn't ever heard of the colors before. Can anyone tell me like what that's actually called?
It's called real colors, I think, or true colors.
Yeah, true colors. True colors is what we use. There's lots of different ones out there. And this is Jean, I can forward the one we use. You can Google it. I've seen different ones too, and I'd be interested from other grantees if they use other kinds of personality, leadership things, because I think to have staff try different ones, it was just a good team building activity and self-learning activity too. But yeah, it was true colors. But I can send you what we have if you want, or I can send it to Jane, and they can email it out too if that's helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and that's great. This is Jane. That's what I was going to suggest. So any of these examples or references that folks would like to send, if you could send to us, and then we'll make available to everyone.
Okay. Yeah.
So I would say anyone on the line who has any sort of the workflow issues or the kinds of ways that you learn about staffs, whether it's learning styles or leadership styles or that sort of thing, ways in which you onboard your staff and integrate them with existing staff. The idea about about incorporating some of that into an all staff development makes a lot of sense, and certainly would have some value, not just for the new staff, but for existing staff, and then also to make those connections with new staff to help them be part of the team. So I have a couple of questions that I'd like to pose to either of our featured grantees and certainly anyone else on the line. A couple of questions. So how do you specifically manage the immediate and unexpected loss of a key staff person? And so the key here is immediate and unexpected. That's very different than someone who Maybe you have a 2-week notice, which isn't a lot of time, or maybe it's a retirement that is coming, months from now, but immediate and unexpected loss of a key staff person, a person who, let's say, wins the lottery and quits their job that day. Something positive, but either way, that it's immediate, it's unexpected, and they're also a key staff person. So how do you manage that, and what can you do to prepare? Examples of how folks have managed that?
Yeah, this is Jean. I think we talk about that, and I don't think we've had any immediate. We've had some, 2 weeks, but I think that's where it's important to have the written processes and workflows in place. The other thing I think is with the multi-level supervision that we have, that the individual is good, but we have weekly team meetings clinically and for our service engagement or the care coordination kind of pieces, so that they're familiar with the other cases that are being staffed too. So there's not just one person working on a case. So you have the supervisors and other staff that are also aware of that. So if, and I think about the immediate, somebody could go out on, illness quickly, so you have other eyes on that. The other thing is with our therapists that we have, we've been hiring therapists, that mostly do just our RPG cases, but we've also been training other therapists that work in the area. So they have some of the EVPs. They're doing maybe some, somebody lives in a certain location, so it makes more sense for them to see maybe a different therapist. So we're creating a bigger pool of therapists so that if somebody leaves, we can, help make sure that the services are continuing for them.
And this is Amanda. So because we're, structured with multiple organizations working together, we also haven't had one where it was like the same day, but like a 2-week notice, which is a really close amount of time. And what we did was that we brought all the supervisors together as soon as possible, as soon as we knew about the notice, and we talked about, and this is for a recovery coordinator position, so we talked about what is the current caseload of that person and what are they leaving behind, and looked at the logistics of would the other recovery coordinator that's existing be able to take that on and make sure that that supervisor's there and they're aware of what's going on and how to support them, and put like a freeze on, just making sure we're all going through and on the same page regarding the logistics. And my role was to kind of facilitate that conversation, also document so that everybody remembered what we had agreed upon in regards to everyone's role from the agency that was losing the person and rehiring the one that was helping support take on the caseload, and the child welfare agency that was kind of that team across the board. And so that was really, really important for that transition. And then we had regular check-ins about that specifically, and then until that new person was hired to take that on. So that was really important for us in being able to make that as smooth as possible.
Thank you both. Thank you both for that feedback. There's anything that can be done in advance or as part of your regular practice to memorialize not just job duties, but as much of the practice and protocol of any position, and making sure that it's in writing, right? Memorializing it, so will be useful. Training our successors or having a sense of who might be stepping into a position next. Not that you're training them entirely, but just having a sense of who's, regardless of when or when it might how it might happen, thinking about that as much as possible. And I know many grantees struggle with just filling the positions that exist, and so it's difficult sometimes to think about what's next. But to the extent that your steering committee can do so, that can be important. A couple of questions came in through the chat box. Someone's asked, would like to hear more from Iowa about how long of the tenure, more about the tenure bonuses, how long of a tenure, and have you received any feedback? So Jean, do you want to you want to take that question?
I'm going to be real cautious with that because we're in the process of implementing that and finalizing some of the details. And so I can get more information and follow up on that with our fiscal department to see where we're at. But we had talked about 6 months and 1 year, and I don't remember the amounts or anything, and I don't have feedback yet because we haven't directly implemented that yet, but we're working on it. So I don't know if anybody else has that, but I guess we'll wait and see what happens with it. We just feel like we want to keep them on, and we need to do something with that. So it's a financial incentive along with that. So I will have to get you more information on that, but definitely we'll share it.
That would be great. Thank you.
The other question, Jean is asking about whether or not there's more information, the PowerPoint, and perhaps anything else about your quarterly implementation training regarding evaluation activities that you mentioned. Is that something you can share with us and we'll share with folks? Great.
Yeah, we can definitely. We had a real detailed agenda for that, and I can, and share with other information we presented. And I know that even at the grantee meeting, if there's, if somebody wants to meet like a special or a luncheon meeting or something, we can have our evaluators are available. Like I say, Michelle Devlin just did a phenomenal job of just really promoting the data and the evaluation piece and the opportunities for staff, and their own personal career in using it. So we can definitely share more with that and how we frame that up. Yep. So I can start by just getting the agenda and kind of sending that out. I'll send it to you, Jane, and you can send that, and then we'll gather up some of the other pieces that went with it. A lot of it is pretty program specific to us, but we can sort through and see what might be helpful.
Thanks,
and I gave them all a colored tulip at the end of it. So milk flower tulip to take with them to remind them of the colors. So
nice.
Anyway,
we're just about out of time. I'd like to ask one other question. There are many other questions, I think, but one other question to see if our featured grantees or anyone has any thoughts about, are there any unique or specific strategies anyone has for recruiting and retaining bilingual staff?
We work to do that because this is Iowa again, Jean. We have several really pockets of diversity in our service area. So one of the things that we do is we reach out to current bilingual staff that are currently work 4 seasons. We use them to talk about how do you recruit. We use them for helping with translation and interpretation. We use them also for just the understanding of the cultural beliefs, or even things like, how do you define depression, or how do you define sadness and that. The other avenue we're fortunate to have is our project evaluators have a lot of knowledge and experience in working with different cultures. They've done a lot of work within Iowa with that, across the nation, and even in other countries. And so they've come with us to help support our staff that we have. The other thing we've done is really reach out in recruiting to other community agencies, and letting them know that we're recruiting, even back to our local universities. We see a lot of second and third generation kids going to college, and from different races and ethnicities. So we're reaching out to those programs in social work, criminology, human services, and that. So those are some of the ways to kind of hire, but I think it's really important in the retaining to provide them with support too, and really help all of our staff understand the value of cultural competency. So I think just personally our staff, other community people, local universities, and then, like I said, our evaluators.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, we're about out of time. I always I always wonder, I'm always worried about what if we don't have enough to cover the entire hour, and yet here we are with other questions, additional questions that we certainly could discuss. We've talked about communication structure and cross-training, examples like uniform job descriptions, the importance of transparency and making sure that folks who are being hired are clear about what the expectations are, on the importance of supervision and also ongoing staff development. We heard about some examples of some things that we will pass along, some creative ideas for retaining staff as well. We want to continue this conversation, so certainly if there are questions you would like answered or would like to continue this conversation in some other way, please let us know, and we will follow up with an email with some additional materials. And then, as Claudia, I think, mentioned, this will be available next week. We'll archive this, and this will be available next week. So with that, I want to particularly thank our featured grantees, and then all of you who joined the call today. And anything else that anyone would like to add before we close? All right. Well, thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you at the grantee meeting next month. And have a great rest of your day.
Okay,
Thank you. Bye-bye.